This year, I've been rebuilding my old reading habits, and it's been a ton of fun, so I thought, why not make a bookish mid-year video, a few weeks late as it may be. Hi, my name is Eliza. Welcome in to my little reading corner, aka my desk. It's time to talk about books. It is almost impossible for me to pick an absolute favorite best book that I've read this year. I will narrow it down to the top 5. I realize I just held up 10 fingers. Bear with me. The absolute number 1 spot so far is actually a two-way tie, but the first one I will talk about is Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. This was an instant favorite. It's easily one of my favorite books I have ever read in my entire life. It just took hold of my entire soul, and I am obsessed with it. Also, do you see how beautiful this book is? Anyway, I digress. At its core, this is a book about stories and the power of stories and the ways in which stories can connect people across the ages, as it were. It balances these interwoven narratives of elements of historical fiction, sci-fi, contemporary, and it was so fun as each piece of the narrative puzzle fell into place. So yeah, I really recommend going into this not knowing very much. I read this on a recommendation from a friend, and it is easily one of my all-time favorite books. So very happy to have read this one. The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This was an author I had been intending to read for a while actually, and just had never read any books from. So I picked this book up and read during spring break. It sort of took over my whole life, just a little bit. I also read the second book, The Obelisk Gate. I still need to read the third book, but every time I go to the bookstore in search of it, they have not had it. So we'll see if the library has it when I get my library card back. But anyway, loved this book. Like with Cloud Cuckoo Land, I think that this is a book that is really worthwhile to experience without really knowing much going in, but it does start with the end of this fictional world. That's not a spoiler, it's on the back of the book. One thing that I really enjoyed about this book was the way that the world building was handled. It all felt very immersive. Yeah, this book starts out somewhat slow, kind of goes at a different pace than books that I'm used to, but I'm really glad that I stuck with it, because at a certain point in this book, everything clicked into place, and I love it when books do that. I also really enjoyed the narration style. It helps me to look at writing in a different way as well, so yeah. Anyway, can't say enough good things about this book, and I can't wait to finish reading this series. So, the next book on the list is a teeny tiny little book, science fiction book, Dune by Frank Herbert. It was my first 5-star read of the year. I read it, I think, in January. I read a bunch of books over winter break when I actually had time for my life. My Dune books, as well as a couple of other books that I'm going to talk about in this video, are in a box somewhere, so we'll pretend that I'm holding them here. I'm not really somebody that reads ebooks or listens to audiobooks. I'd like to listen to some audiobooks though. I just haven't really gotten into the swing of doing that yet, but I like to have the physical book, old school. I've had a friend who's been recommending Dune to me for years, so that one definitely paid off. If you're not familiar with the plot of Dune, the very basic idea is that it is about what happens when the noble house of Atreides gets sent to govern this desert planet, this very important desert planet called Arrakis, and the events that ensue upon their betrayal by the rival Harkonnen family, as well as specifically centering around the rise of Paul Atreides, the heir to the family, towards his great possible destiny. So, sort of a classic hero's journey type situation. Or is it? Especially if you read Dune Messiah, which I read directly after reading Dune, which is the second book. It makes for a really interesting follow-up to the idea of whether or not Paul really is a hero. If you want to, you can also read the third book, which is Children of Dune. But that one's really weird. After I read that one, I had to take a little bit of a hiatus from reading Dune books. I'm going to finish reading the first 6 books, or the 6 books. I don't really know how that's counted, but we'll get to that eventually. My Dune books are in a box currently, so we'll get to that. I say this as a Star Wars fan too, but it was really interesting reading it and going, oh, so this is why this is the way it is in the science fiction genre. It was really interesting to read the origin point of that in terms of modern science fiction. It just started pouring rain outside. I also finally watched Dune Parts 1 and 2 after I read Dune, because I had told myself I could not watch both movies until I had read the book. So I watched them quite literally the day after I finished reading the book, and it was so cool to watch it that way, just to see directly how everything translates into the film form. So that was really fun. Okay, technically I haven't finished reading the next book that I'm going to count as being on this list, but I don't really care about that because I just know that it's going to be on this list, so I'm preemptively ranking it. And that is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. Normally, necromancy would not be my jam at all. However, I was reliably informed that there were lesbians in this book. And therefore, I simply had to read it. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. This book is essentially about a group of necromancers from different planets, different houses, who are undergoing a series of trials and tests in order to potentially work for the Emperor, who I don't know all that much about yet because I haven't finished reading this book, but it's shaping up to look pretty interesting. So far, I just thoroughly enjoy the way that the characters are developing over the course of the book. They just leap off the page. They're so well defined and unique, and their voices are so strong, especially Gideon's, and the way that dialogue is paced, the way that they interact with the situation with each other. I really appreciate the way that the narration is paced and handled, and yeah, I'm having a great time, and I would not have expected that because, as I said, necromancy, not my jam. This book is a vivid, visceral read, and yeah, I can't wait to see what happens at the end of this book and into future books. I'm sure that, given how this book has gone so far, it's going to be a wild ride. The last of the best books that I've read so far this year is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. This is a sci-fi novella which traces the unusual correspondence and subsequent queer love story between two agents on opposing sides of the Time War. A lot of people recommended this book to me, actually, so thank you for that. You know who you are. I absolutely loved the way that language was employed throughout this novella. There were some genuinely beautiful poetic phrasings in this that just, I am obsessed. I love. The book itself is unique and experimental to the point where it's very difficult to understand entirely what's going on, and I think that was the one thing that held this back from being a complete 5-star to me, just because I was so enthralled with the world that I wanted to know more of what was going on and what the Time War entailed and what exactly was going on. However, at the same time, that is something that makes it so different to something that I've read before, where things are laid out much more straightforwardly, in a much more straightforward fashion. I can say words. So this was really a unique and interesting read for me, so I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend. Highly recommend. Also, I love anything to do with letters and sending letters, so this was enjoyable to read some very strange methods of communication, but yeah, this one certainly lived up to the hype. I think the best sequel that I've read so far this year would have to be A Letter from the Lonesome Shore by Sylvie Catherall. This is another book that is in a box somewhere, but we'll find it. This is the sequel to A Letter to the Luminous Deep, which was a book that I read sometime last year, and a book that very casually surprised me with a bunch of queer central characters, which I always really appreciate. I found it so charming, and was the first book that was in the epistolary sort of format that I had read in a really long time, and it's very academic, very charming. Again, I really like anything to do with letters, so yeah, that was fun. The first book follows these two characters who are trying to reconstruct the correspondence of their two siblings, so one character's sister, one character's brother, who had been corresponding with each other prior to their disappearance and presumed death in a undersea incident. And the second book picks up where the first book left off in terms of finding out what really happened, the truth behind that incident and what's really been going on in this world. I'm not usually a person that gravitates towards romance in books as much, but this book was so charmingly done, and it was in epistolary format, and I don't know, I didn't mind it. I actually kind of loved it, so yeah. I was really happy that the sequel built upon my love for the original, so. Honorable mention goes to Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, which remains an honorable mention because it's not technically a sequel, it's more of a actual prequel / companion situation to the Hunger Games series, but it did completely wreck me as a person. So, this is the backstory of Haymitch Abernathy, who's a very major character in the original Hunger Games trilogy. This book takes place between the previous prequel that we had, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and the original trilogy. So it tells the story of Haymitch's experience in the games. I thought that this book was devastatingly good in terms of building out even more backstory and context to the original trilogy and its exploration of propaganda, as well as just showing that the events of the Hunger Games trilogy happened the way that they did because people had been trying to make them happen for years and years and years, which I think is a really important bit of context which deepens the whole impact of the original story. So yeah, that is this book. Only read this if you want to cry. In terms of new releases from this year that I haven't gotten around to reading yet, there's actually one that's been sitting on my shelf and staring at me for the whole time since it's been released, because I had it pre-ordered because I really like this series and I was excited for the third book, and then I just haven't read it, which is Oathbound by Tracy Deonn. This is the third book in the Legendborn cycle. I think the thing that's holding me back on this is that I read the second book right after it came out, and so it's been a very, very long time since I read the second book, so I wanted to reread at least the end of the second book so I had some idea of where we were in the story again, and I haven't gotten to that, so yeah. This will be one of the next couple of books that I read, I think. I have an affinity for Arthurian types of stories and stories with Arthurian twists and connections in them, and the Legendborn series has that in the form of the Legendborn secret societies, and I've really enjoyed the series so far, so I'm excited to find out what happens in this next installment. The other new release that's been on my list is another third book in a series, which is Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales, which is the third book in the Emily Wilde series. Haven't picked this one up yet because I was waiting for it to come out in paperback because I have the other two books in paperback, and we like a matching set in this household. So I really enjoyed the first two books and their cozy, academic, whimsical narrative style. This is something I discovered I liked because of that series, and then subsequently also really enjoyed in the Sunken Archive duology, as I talked about earlier. So I'm really excited about the third book in that series as well. In terms of most anticipated upcoming release, I actually don't have one at the precise exact moment that I'm recording this. All of the books that were on my radar for coming out this year, Oathbound, Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales, A Letter from the Lonesome Shore, and Death of the Author, all came out earlier this year. So if anyone has any suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Book recommendations welcome. The biggest disappointment that I had this year was, I think, actually this book. Now, I will say, this was largely a user error. I mentioned earlier that I'm not really a person that's very into romance or romantasy. I'm thrilled for people that enjoy that kind of thing, that's great. I, however, am usually not that person, just not really my cup of tea personally. I picked it up actually because of a bookseller recommendation based on the fact that the magic system is actually kind of cool. It's sort of tarot card-like in that whoever has control of certain cards possesses the power of that card specifically. And I thought that was really interesting, and it is a really interesting concept, so yeah, I'll give it points for that, but this was just not really my style of book. Biggest Surprise is also fairly easy. I went into full Agatha Christie mode for like a month and read all but one of the books that's in these compilations. That was wild and unexpected. Who could have seen that coming? Not me. But regardless, for a couple of weeks, Agatha Christie was all I could read. So, that's fine. That's fine. I'm not mad about it. I was also, again, surprised by the degree to which the 5th season took over my entire brain for a while. All of these authors are more new to me authors than they are debut authors. But I would say my favorite authors this year have been N.K. Jemisin, Sylvie Cathrall, and probably Tamsin Muir. But in terms of people that I've read the most books from, that would be Agatha Christie, Frank Herbert, and N.K. Jemisin. First, a moment for this song. I cannot stress enough how I am not the right person for this question, so I'll go a different direction with it and say footnotes. This year I have discovered, without any doubt, that I really love a book that's got a footnote. This might all be the art history major in me talking, though. That's all I have to say. I think for this question, I will go with Gideon from Gideon the Ninth. Books that have made me cry. That is all. I think I'll have to go back to A Letter from the Lonesome Shore for this one. I find that duology so charming and comforting, and yeah, I really enjoyed reading that book. I think I'll go with that one. It was really enjoyable to see way more of the world, as well as to get a deeper understanding of what's been really going on within the first book and in its aftermath. I also just am deeply charmed by the characters. Definitely one of my favorite reads for this year. I think the easy winner for the most beautiful book that I've bought this year is going to be Cloud Cuckoo Land. Because have you seen this? Look at this. Look at the spine. How do people get this to focus? A close runner-up being this copy of Remarkably Bright Creatures. Because, yes. My list of books I want to read before the end of the year is rather long and overly ambitious. We'll see how it goes, but books that are kind of on my list upcoming would be the last book in the Broken Earth series, the rest of the Locked Tomb series, the Once and Future King by T.H. White, Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales and Oathbound, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, the rest of the Dune series. I also want to reread The Lord of the Rings because I really enjoyed reading Dune and then watching the movies, so I'm thinking I might reread The Lord of the Rings and then watch the extended versions of the films because I've never seen those before. The extended versions, that is. Maybe more Agatha Christie, maybe more N.K. Jemisin. And then I've got a whole bunch of old favorite YA books that I want to reread because I'm working on writing one. So at least I think it's a YA book. We'll see. Anyway, I think it would be fun to revisit the books that I loved at that time. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. Thank you for watching. Feel free to leave your bookish thoughts in the comments down below. Let's talk about books. Also, if you'd like to follow along, I am currently working on writing a book. So if you'd like, you can subscribe to follow along with the inevitable chaos that is sure to continue to ensue in that writing process. And yeah, I hope to see you in the next video.